Good afternoon and welcome to the 108th of the COVID calls. This is a daily discussion of the COVID-19 pandemic with a diverse collection of disaster experts. My name is Scott Gabriel Knowles. I'm a historian of disasters at Drexel University in Philadelphia. Today, a discussion of stresses on the family in COVID-19 with Dana Green, Gonzalo Bacigalupe, and Christine Gibb. Just a reminder, you can catch COVID Calls live every weekday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time on YouTube. Just go to the COVID Calls YouTube channel to watch. You can also watch COVID Calls on Facebook Live and on Periscope. You can hear COVID Calls anytime, recorded as podcasts on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean, or anywhere you get podcasts. You can also keep up with COVID Calls via Twitter using the handle @US of Disaster or @COVID Calls. Please do help spread the word and send suggestions for future guests and topics. And please feel free to suggest yourself as a future guest. As of today, August 19th, 2020, there are 22,233,473 confirmed cases of COVID-19 globally, according to the Johns Hopkins University Coronavirus Resource Center. That's up from 21,974,080 cases reported yesterday. Of those, 5,512,166 are in the United States, up from 5,469,444 reported yesterday. There are now a total of 172,564 deaths reported in the United States from COVID-19. That's up from 171,343 yet another day, with more than 1,000 deaths day by day. As a way to bring humanity to the numbers, I've been reading a life story or a story of advocacy for those impacted by the pandemic in some way. I'd like to continue that now with just two brief obituaries, part of an extraordinary series put together by The Guardian, which you can check out online. It's called The Guardian Lost on the Frontline series. Elva Graveline, 52, nursing assistant, was a perfectionist who doted on patients. She was a certified nursing assistant at Lawrence Memorial Hospital in New London, Connecticut, and died on the 19th of May. Elva Graveline took small, graceful steps down the hospital corridors. You could see her smile coming, said Connie Fields, her local union president. A perfectionist at work, Elva often arrived an hour early for her 6:45 a.m. shift, according to her husband, Mike Graveline. She doted on her patients with shampoo and razors that she brought from home. She just wanted them smelling good, Mike said. Elva, who grew up in Texas, adored her 2 daughters and 3 granddaughters. The youngest, Isla, was born in April, but Elva never held her for fear of exposing her to COVID-19. Fields said she believes Elva, who worked on a floor designated for COVID patients, got sick from reusing protective gear at work. In March, Elva and others wore the same N95 respirator masks for 2 weeks. Fields said by early May, employees received new N95s each day. Hospital spokesperson Fiona Phelan replied that we value and respect employees too much to not provide the protective gear needed in this battle. Elva tested positive for COVID-19 on the 12th of May and died a week later of cardiac arrest. This should never have happened, Mike recalled telling his wife as he stood at her bedside just after she died. I just wish this was me. Gabriel Chinwendu, 56, was a psychiatric nurse and planned to host a barbecue once he recovered. A registered nurse at Catholic Charities in the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C., he died on the 24th of April, 2020. Gabriel Chinwendu's family and friends remember him as a gentleman who was dedicated to his work as a psychiatric nurse. Love for one another was his mission to care. That was why what happened, said his wife, Gloria Chinwendu. The couple, who had immigrated from Nigeria years ago, had 4 children together. Excuse me. His love, his job, and others led him to lose his life. Gloria said Gabriel was outfitted with personal protective equipment and always washed his hands after seeing patients he suspected of having COVID-19, but on the 17th of April, he left work feeling tired. 2 days later, he went to the emergency room. He was feeling better by the time his test came back positive, and he even promised to throw a family barbecue after he recovered. He died a few days later. Okay, let's turn to today's discussion. And just a reminder, those compelling brief obituaries I was just reading, you can check those out on the Guardian's Lost on the Frontline page. Be sure to check those out. I'm really happy to introduce my guest today. Gonzalo Bacigalupe, the first guest, is a professor of counseling psychology at the University of Massachusetts, Boston, and he leads the Citizen Education and Governance team at the Research Center for Integrated Disaster Risk Management. He's also an artist, and his work has been showcased at the 2018 exhibition Liminal Territory and the Cartographies of Bodies and Territories in January of 2019 at the PUC Innovation Center, the UC Campus, San Joaquin Library, and the Casa Central Hall. And I should say that Gonzalo is a friend of COVID Calls. This is his third visit to COVID Calls, and he also designed the artwork for COVID Calls. So it's great to see you again, Gonzalo.
Can I make a correction
assistant professor.
about something?
Yes, please. Yes, did I get something wrong with the bio?
Yes. So it changed because last week was my last week at CIGIDEN, and I'm associated with another center, in one region, and the center is called CREASUR, which is Create the South. It's about territories and regions. We'll update that bio later.
Okay, and that one's based in Santiago, though.
It's actually based in Concepcion in the south, but it's in
Concepcion.
You can be anywhere. I mean, so yeah.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that correction. This is when you come on COVID Calls multiple times, you can see people's careers literally changing in between one visit to the next. So good to see you, Gonzalo. Let me also introduce Christine Gibb, Assistant Professor of the School of International Development and Global Studies and the Faculty of Social Sciences at the University of Ottawa. Christine works on environmental migration, especially the experiences and mobilities of survivors following natural hazards like typhoons and the formal and informal governance of people's mobility. Her regional focus is often Southeast Asia. For her COVID-19 work, she's been working with a team of researchers studying the pandemic experiences and mobilities of children and seniors, older adults in parts of Canada and the United States. The third member of my team of guests today is Dana Green. Dana M. Green. She is currently an independent researcher on vulnerable populations to disaster with ties to the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Following 20 plus years of teaching courses on disasters, race and ethnicity, gender and sexuality, social theory, genocide studies, and Judaic studies. Real leader in the disaster research field. She's leading the Converge Redefining Family During COVID-19 working group with Dr. Jessica Pardee, who's at the Rochester Institute of Technology. Dana usually works on social vulnerability to disasters research, including race, social class, gender, and sexual orientation in both natural and technological disasters. In addition to her work on several projects that are unrelated to the pandemic, she's also working on multiple COVID-19 projects, including one with Marcy-Lynn Cinfrani that focuses on the lived realities of individuals living with chronic illness and disability in North America during the COVID-19 pandemic. I'd like to thank you all for your time today and welcome you to COVID Calls.
Happy to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So let me start the way I have been starting, just to find out where you're calling from and what the pandemic situation is there. And Dana, since UNC has been so much in the news, I'm not sure if that's where you are, but let me start with you. Where are you calling from and what's it looking like there?
I am calling from just outside of Chapel Hill, North Carolina. I'm in the Research Triangle. And yes, Chapel Hill has been in the news. North Carolina has been in the news because the students at UNC have been in class for 1 week. And as of today, they are being sent home. We are moving to purely online instruction. And the reason for this is that there were 134 new cases of COVID stemming from what they're calling 4 clusters. And in North Carolina, an outbreak is 2 cases and a cluster is 5 or more. So there were 134 cases and only 4 remaining rooms in the quarantine dorm. And as a result, due to a fear of lack of resources, they opted to shut everything down, send the students home. So yes, that's nearby. I also looked up a little bit of the data for the state, and the average turnaround time in North Carolina for COVID tests right now is 2 to 3 days. And the last number that has been published was on August 7th of 2020. We had 3,925 people tested. Of those 3,925 people that were tested, 58% were African American or racial and ethnic minorities, and of that 58%, 80% of them came back positive. So it speaks to the number of people who are working in the lower wage industries and also in less or more diverse types of wage earning categories. And we're seeing that people of color and more impoverished groups of people are more susceptible to the disease in the state.
I know, thank you for giving us that context, Dana. And I know this time of year also, of course, there's always great concern about hurricanes in North Carolina. That's also been, I guess, on your mind there because you work on multiple different types of hazards. Has there been significant planning on how people would shelter or not shelter in the case of a hurricane in the midst of a pandemic?
Absolutely. There's been a tremendous amount of planning that has been going into this. And we actually just did have an earthquake, or not an earthquake. Well, we had an earthquake and a hurricane hit within a week of each other. First was the hurricane, and while it was only a category 1, it caught everybody's attention. What we saw was that there's some concern over sheltering and what kinds of institutions can be used as shelters at the moment. How do we social distance within a shelter? And so the number of rooms in, let's say, a school or in an ordinary, like a hotel, that would be used as a shelter were then co-opted, where we had more space in between each individual family or each individual. But there was also concern over whether people were positive or negative, and people who were suspected as having COVID were segregated off into different areas. In addition to the hurricane, though, we had an earthquake that was minor, as I would see it, coming from California. I'm a native Californian. But at 5.4 on the Richter scale, it was significant for here in North Carolina and definitely disrupted life in the state. What we're seeing right now, I'm also within the 10-mile emergency planning zone of a nuclear power plant. So with hurricanes, with earthquakes, with the pandemic, all of that is creating great concern in this area, because you don't want what we've seen, like with Katrina, this cascading effect of disaster upon disaster upon disaster, primary, secondary, tertiary. And so what we were really looking at is how do we enforce and how do we maintain emergency preparedness across the state. There are more evacuation centers being set up. There's greater testing that's being ramped up. That was announced today that they're trying to get about 80% more tests available within the state by the end of the week. Because while we have been scaling back on testing and people have been reluctant to go be tested because of, let's say, the hurricane or the earthquake, where they're more concerned about their individual property than they are about their personal health or about public health and public safety, what we're seeing is this decrease in the number of tests that are being conducted. What we're trying to do now is to increase the number of tests, which hopefully will be something that people will comply with. We're hoping.
Dana, thank you for that.
Go ahead.
Yeah, what a complicated set of factors, and I wonder how many people listening just went and Googled how close do I live to a nuclear power plant. Christine, can I ask you the same question? Where are you calling from, and what's the situation there?
So I'm calling from a suburb just outside of Montreal in Canada. And the situation is quite different here. Our numbers are significantly lower. In Quebec, in the province where I live, we had 46 new confirmed cases today. And the province where I live actually has the highest number of cases in total in all of Canada. So the pandemic is still front of mind here. And the issues that a lot of folks are thinking about right now have to do with school reopenings and all of these new plans about how are we going to send our kids back to school. And there have been multiple versions of these school reopening plans in different parts of the country. And so there are a lot of discussions among parents, formally and informally in the media with teachers about how exactly it's going to work, whether we're going to be sending our students back to the physical buildings, what kind of hybrid virtual classroom, how is that going to affect different groups of students? So that's really what's front of mind here right now. And it also speaks to the way that the people who are getting COVID-19 has shifted over the course of the past couple of months. So earlier on, most of the people who were catching COVID-19 were in long-term care homes. And that's shifted, and there's a lot more community spread now. So there is a lot more concern that by sending our kids back to daycare and school en masse, there's going to be a greater risk that there's going to be a lot more cases in the coming weeks and months.
Christine, as you may know, in the absence of strong federal guidance on this particular issue about schools, we have intense struggles at the state and local level in the United States around basic trust issues and who to trust when it comes to this very important question about whether or not children should be going back. Do you have similar issues there where you are?
Education is a provincial issue here in Canada. So the feds have some say, but it's more of a recommendation as opposed to any actual power. And it has sparked a number of conversations about whether the federal government should play a role in developing educational policy and setting rules about what schools can and cannot do. So the pandemic's actually opened up this conversation about education that's been simmering for a while, but now it's coming more to the fore. But education is very much decided at a provincial level. And at the university where I work, at the University of Ottawa, we actually straddle the Ontario and Quebec provincial border. So many of the families who live in this area may work on one side of the border and live on the other. And so it makes it quite challenging if you have certain rules for sending your kids to school, but your employer is on the other side and they have different expectations. So you're bringing in a lot of economic issues and back to work issues in with educational and childcare responsibilities.
That is so interesting. I guess I hadn't thought about that as listening to you describe that. But in the United States, if you look at, say, Illinois and Indiana or Pennsylvania and West Virginia, we have similar situation with states that have vastly different approaches to the pandemic, but people would live in towns that might literally straddle that line. Thank you for that context, Christine Gonzalo. Let me turn to you. Where are you today?
So I'm in Santiago, Chile. I'm beginning my right in the middle of the 6 months of quarantine. Although I've been out a few times, taking care of my parents' pharmacy stuff that I couldn't order, and I've been invited to be in TV studios a few times. So that's the only times that I've been out. So Chile is in a very similar situation to the United States. We had a peak later. We had a peak on June 16, 18, with about 5,000 cases. Actually, at that point, 30,000 cases, but that was because they had accumulated ones. But it was like 5,000 cases in one day. And then it had been going down since then. And now we are it varies a lot, but around 1,500 as an average every day. we are only 19 million people, so it's one of the highest daily contingent in the world, and we have, but Chile has a high concentration of people. About 40% of people live in the capital. So the data in the capital defines what's happening nationally, even though regionally it is quite different. And so it's like in the United States. Some places the contingent is not, it's expanding. The reproduction rate is moving up. But it's been, personally, I never thought I would be in the place I am right now. I think I've been on an average, since we're talking a lot about averages, at least once or twice a day I go to radio or TV or have a column, or I'm getting a call. Like right now there's some reporter calling. I get, ask opinions, and it's crazy. And I'm completely exhausted by now. I mean, I hope, actually the meeting I have at 6 is that I got 10 people to ask them for advice about what to do because I cannot sustain this level of work. My classes start, I don't know, in 2 weeks or a week, and I don't even know what I'm, almost like I know what I'm teaching and courses that but I have to think how I'm gonna, and I became sort of like a political figure, which is totally nuts because it's not, something that I was expecting to happen. And, and I was making the parallels with the United States, we also have a very important voting thing on October 28th. It's a plebiscite to approve or not approve a process to get a new constitution. And then there's another vote for change. There's going to be 11 times to vote between now and the end of this presidency in less than a year and a half, which is incredible. So imagine it's like in the United States. There's also we are coming out of a lot of social unrest, so to speak, like the George Floyd in the United States, but right before the pandemic. We've been on curfew since March, and they're going to start lifting it a little bit. And now we are in the whole process to figure out, are we going to have a plebiscite or not? And that's so that now in terms, I'm teaching in UMass Boston, so I'm teaching online. It was crazy because until like, I don't know, a month and a half, they were still thinking, are we going to have some people on campus? Finally, we convinced them that it was crazy. We had a lot of problems and a lot of sort of digital protests because our campus was used by the police as a place to get to control the communities around. So it created a huge turmoil. We do think, many of us think that there's not going to be an open campus in the spring. And I already said, I'm not going back to campus. And, a lot of us had the option to choose to teach just online. But we don't know yet what is going to happen in the spring. Although I do think that that's, as a public health person, I think that generally people don't know how to evaluate risk. They think too much about, are we going to have it or not? It's like the school thing. It's like what you just told us in UNC is what is going to happen in Boston in September. And probably by the third or fourth week of September, it's going to be a huge news that Boston, all the schools have. I mean, it's obvious. It's predictable. And it's just to finish my introduction. It's been quite demoralizing to see how corruption and conflict of interest around the vaccination stuff and the PCR, the testing and having to be one of the people I'm part of a joint group of scientists and experts here who we've been trying to get the data, but people are exhausted. We are all exhausted. We all do this on our own, time and money and whatever. Right. And a lot of us don't get institutional. That's the reason. One of the reasons I left CIGIDEM, because CIGIDEM was not supporting me in doing this. So, but the thing is, it's a microcosm of what is happening in so many places. But one of the things that is really worrisome, I was listening to your definition, Dana, on outbreaks. And so the subsecretary of health last Sunday defined and said, he was asked what is an outbreak, and he used your definition. And so the next day I went on the news, I went on CNN, and I said, I went to one of those Good Morning Americas kind of thing. They were deconfining the city, parts of the city. It was a huge mess. And I said, you see, we have an outbreak every minute in Chile. Because I was calculating exactly 1,440 minutes a day. There's about that was exactly the number of day of cases. And it was an outpour. I was like, it was all day long, just because I said that line of thinking. We have an outbreak, at least one a minute. And it was the government could not answer to that thing, and because they want to sell the discourse of an outbreak when the pandemic is not under control. I mean, we expect outbreaks, right? But they're saying we're going to have outbreaks. They say, oh, we're going to have outbreaks. Yeah, but you still the rate of contagion and the rate of the mortality rate every day is just crazy. So that's where we are. Yeah.
I think the definition is a misnomer, though, because
absolutely.
To say that you've got an outbreak or a cluster at 5 or more, it's the N of 5 or the N of 2 saying that you've got cluster. It's just bad. It's just wrong. Yeah. So when I was smiling because all of a sudden and it said 2 more clusters. So literally 8 students.
Right.
Have been tested
So let
positive.
me just what an astounding we have a tour of the Americas today with our discussion, and thank you all for sharing. Also talking, I think, so authentically about the stresses that you're all dealing with in your lives and as researchers. I know you've all come together as part of a working group to focus on the family and COVID-19. And this disease has put so much stress on families, essential workers quarantined in their own homes, loss of work, students at home, childcare. I mean, just to try to come up with measures for these impacts absolutely boggles the mind. So I want to hear from each of you on this. Well, Dana, I'm going to start from you. What is this working group aspiring to do? What are the core questions that you came together to research? Take us into how we should be thinking about how the family is holding up in COVID-19.
Well, COVID-19 itself is an inverted disaster because we're living within our basic creature comforts, and yet we're facing a major disaster, a major issue as a result of this virus that is all around us, and yet in some cases not around at all. It's a disaster that we can't see. And so what we're looking at with this working group, the way that Jessica Pardee and I conceptualized it, is that family in and of itself as a basic unit, as a basic social unit, can be both an asset and a hindrance. We've got our infrastructure intact, and what we have is water that's potable. We've got power running. We've got challenges, though, to our basic social order. So where family is often seen as an asset in disaster preparation, survival, and recovery, the nature of the virus, the nature of COVID-19 requires social distance and isolation. It prevents care work from retaining its traditional forms. It simultaneously keeps families together through spatial confinement and also tears families apart. And as a result, we're looking at the spatial rupture, as we're calling it, as well as the emotional congealing of social kin families. Those of first responders, those of coworkers, neighbors, athletic teams, clubs, systems of care. As support work was once done by familial kin, now it's being done by people outside of the family, people outside of the realm of social analysis. And so our working group was put together under what we're calling the collective method. It's a group of 11 projects that looks at different aspects of family, loosely defined, and then comes together to form a basis of support for each project. So our projects focus on everything from childcare and LGBTQ issues to disability, immigration, medicine, coping strategies, and sports during the pandemic, with the family as the central key and central unit of analysis. So I can say within most of our work, we're looking at children, we're looking at disabled, we're looking at the elderly, but we're also looking with all these different social variables at the confluence of a combination of variables. So we're looking at the confluence of poverty and race and age, or poverty, race, age, and disability, or immigration status, or the impact of this 2020 census that's happening right now and what that's going to mean in the age of a pandemic. So census takers or census responders as a cohesive group or non-cohesive group, as the case may be, because people are not answering their door. We're looking at the election and people who are running the polls as a unified family group versus those who are trying to vote by mail as another group, perhaps not unified by anything other than, let's say, political party in our very divisive US form. But I can also say that for our family working group, the way that we conceptualized it is that we wanted to have it be an international group. So we have representation from Chile, from Canada, from India, Germany, and the US. And for the purposes of this call, I thought it would be interesting to have Christine from Canada and Gonzalo from Chile, and then obviously you and I from the United States. Because the way that we are looking at family may be similar in terms of what we've got as a written definition, but in practice, in each of these contexts, is very different.
Let's go further with that. Christine, I know you're looking at maybe, you're thinking about the family, you're looking at the younger members and the older members maybe, and mobilities within that context. Can you tell us what aspects of the family are drawing you into this work and what you're finding?
So the approach to family that I'm using may be one that's more familiar to listeners in their everyday lives. So I'm focusing more on the children and the parents or the guardians in the family, as well as older adults who may also be grandparents or great grandparents. So in that sense, the family unit may be more familiar to people. What's changing with COVID-19 is these households are having to be much more deliberate about who the household or who the family members are, taking into account health risks, taking into account economic considerations and constraints. If someone is a frontline worker, they may have to redefine their family unit because they're separating themselves from their children or from the parents who they're taking care of at their place. You're seeing some ruptures between the younger children and teenagers who are no longer able to see their grandparents or great grandparents, and so the care that the older generations are. I'm just seeing things pop up on the screen. And so our usual support systems and the networks that we rely on to function as social beings, as economic beings, those are being ruptured, and we're having to come up with alternatives. And so these are some of the findings that are coming out. So just the deliberate changes that people are having to improvise with and to implement. And these are also changing as the public health restrictions are changing, and we're being told that we can do this, but the next day we can't do that. As an example, here in Quebec, where I live, the age where you were not allowed to work the population at risk was 60 and up, until the government decided that they wanted schools and daycares and other workplaces to reopen, and there were quite a few employees in the 60 to 65 age range. So then the guidelines changed, so it was now 70 and up who were at risk. And so you have this population, the 60 to 65, 60 to 70, who aren't sure if they can trust this information, if the change in public health guidelines is based on scientific research, or if it's based on a political desire to have certain people return to work so the economy can reopen. So the changing guidelines make it difficult for families to decide, can my 5-year-old go to see my 62-year-old mother based on these guidelines? So it's this intersection of public health guidelines, the personal networks that we rely upon in order to get our work done and our day-to-day lives.
Just to stay with that for 1 second, Christine, multi-generation families, multi-generation sort of family groups, and we think about those disruptions, how much does that also track to people who already might have some kind of economic vulnerabilities? In other words, are there some correlations there, so that people, you're seeing not only these restrictions that you just talked about, but these are also people that are using grandparents or other elders in their family for childcare or other kinds of essential needs, so that the family unit can work, the mother and father can work?
Very much so. Here in Canada, in the various provinces, we have different childcare systems. So in Quebec, where I live, there's a very progressive childcare system where you, if you have a provincial spot, then you're paying $8 a day per child. So it's very, very affordable, as compared to in neighboring Ontario, you could be paying upwards of $100 per day. So, so the reliance on family for childcare is very different, depending on your economic situation, depending on where you live in the country. So one of the things that this pandemic is really bringing to the fore is the need for a national childcare strategy.
So let me, Gonzalo, bring you in on this, and I know you're a counselor and psychologist. I mean, I just would give my own experience that I grew up, my grandparents lived close by, and they were, I mean, I interacted with them daily throughout my childhood until I was a teenager. And they did provide childcare, but they provided much more than childcare. I think I didn't realize this till I was older, but I mean, they were just an essential grounding part of my life. And that's nothing to say about my parents, but I mean, I had very special, strong relationships with my grandparents. And I can only, I think you and I may have talked about this briefly, but when the pandemic first started, I actually had the strangest experience. I had a pang of concern for my grandparents. They've been dead for 20 years. But I had this feeling of concern at that moment, which spoke to me about this sort of intergenerational, multi-generational connections, which are part of sort of psychological grounding in a family, I think. I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit, your concerns about these configurations and how they're disrupted. And then I guess if you'd be willing to say a little bit about the specific Chilean context with that too, because families are under all sorts of economic stress in Chile as well.
Yeah. Wow, that's a big question. You know, one of my interests being in thinking about these families that in some way live in collective environments, shanty towns, new settlements, informal territories. And I'm gonna get to your question, Scott, but one of the things that I've been finding myself is writing and collaborating with this, the ollas comunes, which means something like the common pot, which always have emerged during crises here, economic crisis, or during any of the disasters we have had. And they're pretty effective at, in this case, actually, usually these common pot, these collective pots, get people together and cook together and eat together and everything. In this case, it got people together to cook and get the stuff, but then delivering the food to the family. So I've been collaborating. I mean, and I wrote about that early on in the pandemic, actually before I joined the group this group. The idea was to figure out how do we learn about that process, right? And it has a lot of, and then getting to your question, it has an emphasis on getting to people who cannot walk, who have difficulty, older people, getting them the food. I mean, here, retirement money is really low. I mean, it really gets you in poverty. It's very, there's a very few people who really can live off that. And so that's one piece. And then the other piece, and this is something that happened a lot, I live in Spain, so I have a lot of connections with folks in the Basque Country and in Catalonia. And one of the things that happened there is that your life as an adult with kids depends a lot on your parents or great-grandparents, actually, because they pick up the kids' school, they live close by.
Right.
It's part of the network that allows for longevity in Spain, which was, that's the good thing about longevity, but also in terms of the virus, it was a mess because a lot of people die very early on. And they live longer, etc. They live in the city. They're not separated in places. They're pretty integrated to the social life. They have their own groups. They have their own activities, etc. So, just getting back to Chile, and this is connected to also to the school return. I mean, one of the things that we've been fighting is against this technocratic view of getting kids back to school, which is, it's about the grades, and it's about moving to the next grade, and it's about, you got to learn these things so that you can test these things. This obsession with the testing, similar to the States, actually, in many places, that denies, and then it's funny, the right-wing government use this as it generates more inequality if you don't get these kids back to school. But the fact is that the kids the inequality was there, is going to continue, and it's going to be furthered by this. Let's assume that. But one of the pieces that is, in answering your question, that is never seen is that these kids are going to be interacting with their grandparents and their aunts and their older uncles, and that is going to, might be that the kids, only a few get the thing and the few get sick. And here we're going to get to the issue of a few die. And I always say, if an 8-year-old dies in school, forget that the school is going to function for 6 months, because you're going to have grieving, and it's a disaster. It's a complete disaster. It's psychologically that an 8-year-old die on a 13-year-old die suddenly because of the COVID. Imagine the impact on that community. And so,
Right.
But that is going to impact it's going to put people at risk. But also, what do you do? Here, older people cannot go out under no circumstances until this last Monday, when they have hours they can go out. There's a whole thing. And there's a whole uproar among 75-year-old people who say, hey, I'm an active member of society, and they're treating me like a child, and I don't. So it's very complex. And, one of the things that they discovered in Spain is that one of the things that it was always invisible was the impact that this whole quarantine thing was that the kids would have to get through school while being at home. We speak about the pressure on us as parents. Well, my kids are older, but my partner has, teenagers. But pressure for them to perform while we're going through this inverted disaster that Dana was talking about, it's crazy. And it's having consequences. I'm thinking, I became those crazy things before the pandemic. I ran for president of the Division 43 of APA, and I won. And which is the Society of Couple and Family. And so I'm thinking that's what is going to be one of the themes that I would like to have a symposium next year, is this whole, how, the whole layers of things, some of those where we just talked about, how they work out during a pandemic, and that they're completely invisible for the policymakers, that they just see curves, they see patients. So, I actually ask one of the people who work with the Minister of Education, I say, yeah, okay, fine. He says, oh, but the fatality rate is very low. And I say, look, if you're in a city of 40,000, you have 2 high schools, maybe 1 actually, 1 kid die, and you're gonna have a revolution in that town, and you're gonna be responsible. Who's gonna be responsible for the death of that kid? And let's say that a kid gets sick. He's the source, he's traced to being the source for every kid to get, not every kid, but a percentage of the kids get sick, and 1 kid die. You're destroying the life of that kid for whom the contagion was tracked to. The guilt about it, because this is the whole thing about the responsibility of people, and we're gonna enforce the law but what happens with someone feeling responsible for the death of another one? It's very complex. It's not simple.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me remind people you're listening to COVID Calls, and we're talking about family and stress and COVID-19 with Dana Green and Christine Gibb and Gonzalo Bacigalupe. I want to bring in another layer of this, and Dana, let me bring this to you first, because early on in COVID Calls, I talked with Amy Hamry and Amy Slayton about disability and about mutual aid, and they really, it was a phenomenal discussion, and got us thinking about, disability communities and people with chronic illness who already face significant stress within their family units and have to also improvise family and mutual aid. So can you talk to us about your findings in that regard, and what you're seeing with COVID-19 for disability communities right now? I talked with them back in April, so we're into August now. I'd like to know what's happening.
In the United States right now, things are going downhill fast. Right now, what we're seeing for communities of people with disabilities, whether they are physical disabilities, chronic illness types of disabilities, or cognitive disabilities, is that access to resources has been basically cut off. There are food pantries that are available. There are some programs to get much needed medications, but in terms of rideshare services, many of those services have been shut down, so that older people, especially, or people with physical disabilities, are unable to get to certain places like senior centers or community rec centers, or how do we call it? Physical therapy or therapy types of sessions, because either those therapy sessions have been canceled or transportation to those sessions have been canceled. In addition, because of the individual in the White House, many people have lost their access to much needed medications. It's very difficult to get medications that are made outside of the United States right now. And bringing them in has posed a problem not only for people with more mild disabilities or more mild issues that might need to be medicated in some way, but also for people who need it on a more chronic basis, especially for older adults who have mobility disabilities and or have, let's say, a heart condition or blood disorders, or God forbid, cancers, or something that's a little bit more terminal. And so that has posed a tremendous problem. And when the medications are available, they are beyond expensive. And so what we have to look at here are some of the issues that are playing in. Now, there are some questions that have been raised that come out of the disability community that are really prevalent for thinking about the COVID-19 disaster as it is. If we think COVID-19 issues that we've seen and the types of accommodations that have been very quickly put together for people all around the country, they're disabled and non-disabled alike, what we're seeing is that many of the accommodations are the types of things that people with disabilities have been asking for since the inception of the 1973 Rehabilitation Act, and then also the Americans with Disabilities Act. And that are things like adaptations to the work environment, having meetings via Zoom, which has now become normalized and before was an exception. Having people earn their regular salaries by working from home. Most of us, if not all of us, we're talking to the world right now from our home offices or from our home, somewhere in our homes. This was before just something that was an accommodation for people with disabilities and was often shunned and really stigmatized. In addition, the salaries that were being made by people who were working from home were cut. And now people are earning their full salaries by working from home. So that's another issue. We could also look at the inception and basic use of telemedicine. Something that, for a long time, people have been calling in and saying to their doctors, hey, I'm experiencing this symptom, this symptom, this symptom. And the doctor would say, well, I think you might have X, Y, or Z, but you might need to come in. Now we see full medical visits online, 100%, with just instructions, go get this test result or go get this treatment at the center if you feel like you are willing to take your life into your hands, put on a mask and go. And this raises a couple of questions, like, why is it that the type of services that disabled people have been asking for so long are now being normalized for the non-disabled? And this leads us to another question, that is, moving down the line, as we pass through this pandemic and get to the other side, will these practices still be in play and still now be normalized 100% across the board? And what does that mean in terms of how people with disabilities and people who are lacking disabilities, or as we call in sociology, temporarily able-bodied, because at some point everybody would have some type of disability. How is it that people will be then on either a level playing field, or will people without disabilities still be privileged above those with disabilities?
That's such a
and these are huge questions. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, it's such a remarkable point to make, and that to be told your entire life, well, no, such accommodations are just not possible. And then literally within 30 days, these accommodations are made possible in countries around the world. It also raises the concern, from what I've been reading, that they could then flip the other way and could then, and you even said in your first part of the answer to this question was, because these things are not budgeted, they get pulled back too by this point in the pandemic, like the rideshare services. Christine, I don't know if you wanted to comment on anything that Dana was just talking about, or bring this into the perspective of your work about these issues.
Just to add on to what Dana was saying, in the Canadian context, the government has introduced the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit. So it's a payout that you can get, and it's $500 a week for up to 4 months. And one of the issues that's being raised by disability advocates is this question of, do our lives count for less? Because over the years, Canada's disability assistance rates haven't kept up with the cost of living. And so all of a sudden, when COVID hit, the government was able to find these pots of money to pay workers to stay at home to make up for their salaries. But these same requests from the disability advocates have gone pretty much onto deaf ears for years and years and years. So exactly what Dana was saying, that these accommodations that advocacy groups have been asking for in terms of telehealth and so on, it was always no, no, no. But then when temporarily able-bodied persons suddenly had to stay at home, then all of these accommodations were developed. So they're not perfect, and I don't know if they're going to be sustained after the pandemic. But there was but there was much more of a willingness to explore these possibilities. So there is this opening of the conversation, even though it's not necessarily going to stay.
Let me, we're just reminding everybody listening to COVID Calls, and you can still get a question in if you want to, just put it in the YouTube live chat. We've got a few minutes left. We're almost up on time. So much terrain here still to cover, but to the point that both of you are just raising, I'd like to get a quick hit from each of the three of you. Is this a possibility of a moment of activism and political reform? And I'd like to hear about that from each of your perspective for each of your countries that you're calling from. Disasters, in my experience, more often than not, provide, they don't turn into lasting social welfare reforms. If anything, sometimes they do the opposite. They marginalize and further damage people who are already marginal. Yet this is a different kind of disaster, Dana. As you said, it's an inverted disaster. Also, the temporality of it is weird. It's longer. It will extend past election cycles. So I'm less pessimistic than usual that there is a possibility for politics here to emerge in the moment. Could I get just a quick round from each of you on this? Gonzalo, let me start with you, and then Christine, back to you, and then Dana.
Yeah, so definitely yes, and at the same time, no. So first, I've been thinking a lot about this, and I think that the first thing is the moment, because it's so long and because it requires quarantine for those who are doing quarantines, or requires a complete reshuffle of your life because of this thing. And I call it not anymore a disaster, I call it a catastrophe, because countries cannot do this alone. They require another country to help them. And that is the definition of a catastrophe. So, the deployment of the vaccine means that to resolve it, quote, resolve it, it's not gonna resolve everything, but what I think it does is that it forces everybody, not everybody, but at least it forces people who are interested in change into think about what matters. And so in that sense, for those who are more progressive or maybe liberal or more neoliberal, I don't think that for people in the fascist, very right-wing conservative, it's going to change. They're going to hung down like they do around the climate crisis, I think. They're not going to change. There are groups that are not going to change. But I think for a lot of people, it's going to mean to rethink the idea of growth. They're going to rethink the idea of exploiting nature. They're going to rethink the idea of what it means to be a caged animal. So a lot, it might make them rethink about how to value common spaces, and also the idea of what a right is. So in that sense, the right to health. If we cannot get universal health care out of this, we're screwed. If we cannot get, it means that we never change. That's what that means, that is screwed. If we cannot advance into securing a minimal income for people in many places, we are messed up. That kind of thing. Because in some way, and I did a study that was published in Massachusetts around Latinos in Massachusetts and how bad we do in Massachusetts in terms of COVID. And if we don't do something, what happens in the United States that it gets mixed with the issue of racism and institutionalized racism. In Chile, it gets mixed up with the issue of access and dignity and all that. So that, I think that piece is central. And then there's another small one. I think that this crisis, and this is what you do here, Scott, and which some of us are doing everywhere, that we are redefining the relationship between science and politics. That the idea, we know, I think all of us know that it's not about, I'm doing my research and then policy people are going to be interested and they're going to change the laws. We know that it's not the case. It doesn't work that way. But that the COVID, the speed, because quote is a slow disaster, but the speed of change of information is so quick. I mean, every day you're learning new things. There's things happening, defines how we do prevention. This whole thing about suddenly the frozen food or the aerosol or anything. I mean, some fake, some not real, but in a way, what is our role as academics, as people who do, as for knowledge workers that create knowledge, actually, not knowledge workers, knowledge creators? What is our role in policymaking and politics? And I think that in many, many different ways, this is going to lead us to reconceptualize a lot of things, and that should lead to hopefully some change.
Okay.
Yeah, those are the two things.
Note of, yeah, I appreciate that, and I'm going to bring that back to Christine and to Dana. Possibility that this is a moment of political formation, particularly around support for family and support for people with disabilities. And Gonzalo has thrown down the gauntlet that actually we academics have a role to play here too. I like that provocation. Christine, what do you think?
Just to add on to everything that Gonzalo said, some great thoughts there. I'm hopeful that the pandemic will create more of an opening for a feminist response to the pandemic and how we rethink the way that our societies function, the way our economies work, and that we're building in more of a focus on our ecological systems and on the environment, because we're actually able to work from home. We don't need all of this dependence on fossil fuels, except for powering our computers and all that. But going back to the feminist response to the pandemic, when we're thinking about infrastructure, so if you have a crisis, when you think of your economic crisis, or another typical disaster with a hurricane or flooding, there's a slew of money that's poured into rebuilding roads and bridges and buildings. So it's very physical. It's very much focused on the jobs that are typically held by men. And so they're coming out of disasters. Research has shown that in most cases, men disproportionately benefit than as compared to women. With this inverted disaster, we don't have falling telephone poles and broken bridges, but we do see that our social infrastructure needs some serious work. So we have this opening to invest in social infrastructure, investing in care, investing in our education systems, which, as Gonzalo has pointed out, are vastly different for different people around the world, for different economic classes, different all sorts of things. So investing in childcare, investing in health, investing in elder care. And in Canada, one of the conversations that's happening is, do we need to bring in a universal basic income? So there is this opening, and I'm hopeful that this will translate into political action and policies that are put into place.
Thank you both for that, and we're just about up on time. I know that you all
to
have
go.
other meetings you have to go to. Gonzalo, you're going to go. I'm sure
I'll
we'll
listen
have you
to
back soon.
Yeah, and I listened to your the recording with Dana. Thank you.
Okay, take care, my friend. Dana, then could you like to get your sense of this from the U.S. perspective, and any sort of final thoughts you want to convey just about the work you're doing right now?
Well, there's a lot that is running through my mind as I listen to Gonzalo and also to Christine. And the first thing that I want to point out is that, international human rights law maintains that the government has an obligation to provide and protect people's rights to adequate standards of living in terms of food and nutrition, in terms of health, and in terms of social security. And I would venture to go out on a limb here and say that the United States is failing miserably. We are just not providing what we need. And in fact, we are vilifying and stigmatizing those who end up needing to ask for the help. And so with that, with regard to what we need to be doing and the feminist response that Chris mentioned, I think that we are all looking at various different aspects of this pandemic as a social, as an environmental, as an ecological disaster. And I venture to say that it's also a disaster that it disproportionately affects people of color as well as people with disabilities and older adults. Because we know that social isolation in and of itself can affect mental health, and that mental health kinds of issues will also affect the susceptibility to various viruses and various external diseases that could be brought into a family unit. I'd also like to bring up the idea of the Black Lives Matter movement, and what that has meant in terms of the pandemic and people being out there demonstrating after George Floyd. And I think that the racial dynamics in this country are also affecting our response to the pandemic, because people are out there saying, well, if you can protest while wearing a mask, you can stand in line to vote. Or and they're equating the two when they're two very different kinds of issues. Right. We need to look at all of the different kinds of things that are happening in our society and really pay attention to the fact that we are not addressing any one issue substantially enough. And I would also venture to say that, and it's something that I raised with a variety of colleagues recently, that as we aim to provide a more thoughtful, a more feminist, and a more realistic response to this pandemic, and addressing it in a way that affects people across all the various different spectrums, that we need to really look at giving aid and providing aid and access to resources, people who might not have access to health insurance, people who might not have access to medical care, or children who are living within food insecure families and don't have access to the breakfasts and the lunches that they would normally get at school. And hunger also is a predisposition to contracting the virus. We really need to look at how we can increase the relief that we're getting for COVID. Right now, the United States is in a situation where the discussions about a new COVID relief plan have fallen through, and the Congress has left session without there being any kind of agreement for people who actually really do need it. We've also got an economy that's on the verge of recession. We have people who are being kept in prisons in unsafe situations. We have immigrants that are being treated as criminals. All of these different variables are affecting how we see and how we are treating and how we are responding to the pandemic. And help needs to be given. So on the verge of, when we think about the family and the family working group, what we are hoping for is to be able to highlight the experiences of people in these different groups, in these different familial groups, if you will, people with disabilities, older adults, children in child care, healthcare workers, if you will, and to address the inequities that exist within the system in terms of building up the family unit instead of cutting it down.
Well, we've had a few different configurations of Converge working groups, and I'm just universally astounded at what you're all accomplishing, and the breadth of what you're taking on right now is important. I wish you good luck and stamina with this work. Thank you for surfacing so many of these concerns, and it was really, I don't think this is the first call we've had where I actually had, we didn't have Central America, but we had the Americas really represented. It's interesting to get that perspective on things. I want to remind people you've been listening to COVID Calls, and tomorrow be talking to historian John Barry, the author of The Great Influenza and other books, and we'll be talking about the 1918 pandemic and 2020. John has a opinion piece up in the New York Times yesterday. Check that out, and we'll look forward to talking with him. And I want to thank Dana Green and Christine Gibb and Gonzalo Basagalupe, who's not on screen at this time, but I think is listening in. Thank you all so much for this hour. Appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay healthy, everyone. See you tomorrow, 5 o'clock.